She's dangerous. My niece watched everything. Get her away from the children. That's what my brother said to the child services officer who showed up at our front door 40 minutes into our own housewarming party, while my wife stood there 7 months pregnant, still holding the dish towel she'd been using to dry the glasses for our guests. My name is Ryan Cole. I'm 32 years old. And that was the night I stopped having a brother. Let me tell you about Nora first, because none of this makes sense unless you understand who she is. She teaches kindergarten at Whitmore Elementary. She has for 6 years. Every September, her classroom has a waiting list of parents who specifically request her. She keeps a jar of spare snacks in her desk for kids who show up hungry. She cried on the last day of school. Every single year. That is the woman my brother accused of being dangerous around children. That is the woman he had reported to CPS. On the night we finally moved into our first home. While she was pregnant with our son. My brother Derek is 4 years older than me. 42 financial firm, corner office, the kind of guy who makes sure every person in the room knows his title within the first 2 minutes of conversation. His wife, Melissa, has a specific talent for smiling at you while saying something designed to cut you down. Together they are a polished, coordinated machine. I spent most of my 20s thinking that was just how successful couples operated. I know better now. The house was a 3-bedroom on Caldwell Drive. Nora and I had saved for 4 years. She picked the kitchen tile herself, 3 different samples taped to the wall for 2 weeks before she decided. I installed the bookshelves in the nursery crooked the first time and she didn't say anything mean about it, just handed me a level and said we'd fix it together. That house was ours in every sense of the word, and we wanted to share it, so we invited everyone. Her parents, our friends, my brother and his family. The first hour was fine. Nora had made everything from scratch. My mother kept wandering from room to room saying it was beautiful. Derek circled the backyard with a drink in his hand and a look on his face I had seen before but never quite named. Like he was appraising something. Like he was calculating a price. I was in the kitchen refilling the charcuterie board when I heard his voice from the front hallway. Sharp and authoritative. I want to speak to whoever responded to the call. I came around the corner and saw 2 people standing at the door holding badges. Child Protective Services. And Derek was standing beside them like he had been expecting them. The room went quiet the way rooms do when something is genuinely wrong. Not the polite quiet of an awkward moment. The hollow, suspended quiet of everyone holding their breath. Nora walked out of the dining room still holding that dish towel, and she looked at the badges and then she looked at me and I saw something cross her face that I never want to see again. Not fear exactly. More like the specific confusion of someone who has done absolutely nothing wrong and cannot locate the logic of what is happening. My brother told the officers that Nora had been observed that afternoon being physically rough with his daughter, Emma, who was 4. He said he had multiple witnesses. He said, given Nora's condition, meaning her pregnancy, he was concerned about the environment and the safety of all children present, including his own. Nora said quietly, very quietly, I would never touch Emma. I love Emma. Derek looked at her with an expression of calm, manufactured concern. I believe you think that, he said. I stepped forward. You need to leave, I told him. I wasn't shouting. I was the opposite of shouting. This is our home and you need to leave right now. The officer held up a hand. Sir, we received a formal report. We are required to respond. We'd like to speak to your wife separately. What followed were the worst 40 minutes of my life. They took Nora into our own living room and closed the door. I stood in the hallway with my mother, who kept saying Derek would never, and Melissa beside her with her arms folded and that smile that wasn't a smile. Our friends trickled out quietly. I didn't blame them. My father stood very still by the front door and said nothing, which I have since thought about more than I want to admit. When the door opened, the officer asked Nora if she would voluntarily come in for a formal interview the following week. Standard procedure, she said, given the nature of the complaint. Nora said, yes, without flinching. Stood up straight, and looked at Derek once before she turned away. He was still smiling. After everyone left, I sat on the kitchen floor with Nora and she put her head on my shoulder and we didn't talk for a long time. Then she said, he planned this. It wasn't a question. I already knew the answer. I just needed to figure out why. The why didn't take long once I started actually looking. 6 weeks before our housewarming, our grandmother had passed. She left a specific clause in her estate that divided her financial assets equally between grandchildren who owned property. Derek had been renting for 2 years following a quiet financial restructuring at his firm that I had not been told the details of. Nora and I, now homeowners of record, qualified for the inheritance. Derek and Melissa did not. I found this out through a probate attorney I contacted the morning after the housewarming. Her name was Janet Kim, and she had been a year above me at the university we both attended. I hadn't spoken to her in 8 years. I called her at 7 in the morning, apologized for the hour, and explained the situation in 2 minutes flat. She said, "Don't apologize, I've got coffee, start from the beginning." I gave her everything. The timeline, the complaint, the officers' names, the specific language Derek had used. She was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she said, "This is malicious. What he filed is a knowingly false report, and if we can demonstrate the financial motive alongside the timing, we're not just looking at CPS defense. We're looking at civil liability." "I want to stop him," I said. "Completely." "Then we need more than motive," she said. "We need documentation." Here's what I knew about my brother that he didn't know I knew. Derek had always been careless with his work devices when he came to family events. He would take calls in the next room, leave his laptop open, forward documents to himself from personal email because the firm's security protocols annoyed him. I had watched him do this for years without ever thinking much about it. It was just Derek being Derek, above the rules in his own estimation. What I also knew was that our grandmother had asked me, specifically me, to help her organize her digital files 2 years before she died. She didn't trust technology, and I was patient with her. Over the course of several Sundays, I had sorted through her email, her cloud documents, her scanned files. And I had seen a series of emails between her and Derek from 14 months prior, in which he had pushed, persistently and with escalating pressure, to have the property clause removed from her will. She had declined each time. In the last email, she had told him firmly that she found his persistence disrespectful and that she needed him to stop. I had never mentioned these emails to anyone because it hadn't seemed relevant at the time. It was relevant now. I forwarded the full thread to Janet that afternoon. She called me back within the hour. "This is the motive and the premeditation," she said. "He couldn't change the will, so he tried to disqualify you from it by destroying Nora's credibility before the estate finalized. If CPS had found cause, even preliminary cause, there would have been a record. Records create delay. Delay during estate finalization can trigger a contested process. He was buying time and buying leverage." I sat with that for a moment. "He didn't just want to hurt Nora," I said. "He wanted to use her." Janet's voice was careful. "Your brother is smart enough to make something cruel look like something concerned. That's actually harder to fight than pure aggression. But it's not impossible." Step 1 was the CPS interview. Janet accompanied Nora. I waited in the parking lot for 2 hours. When they came out, Nora's face was composed and Janet was already typing on her phone. The investigator closed the matter as unsubstantiated. Janet told me. They reviewed Emma's own statements. Emma said Nora caught her when she tripped on the porch steps. She said Nora was nice. That's the entirety of the incident. Derek told the officer. Nora grabbed Emma roughly. Emma said the opposite. Case closed. I expected to feel relief. Instead, I felt something sharper. Because closed was not the same as finished. Derek had filed that report knowing it was false. He had done it on the night we were celebrating our home, while my wife was carrying our child, in front of our families and friends. He had looked at Nora and calculated right that she was usable, that her goodness was a tool he could pick up and throw at us. I was not interested in letting that go. Janet filed a civil suit for malicious reporting and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Standard process. She explained, would take time. But there was a parallel path. The false CPS report was a matter of legal record. It connected to a probate proceeding that was still open. And the email thread demonstrating Derek's prior effort to manipulate the estate created a pattern of deliberate interference. The probate attorney handling our grandmother's estate received a formal notification of the civil filing and the documented context. They were required to flag potential litigation when finalizing distribution. What that meant practically was that Derek's attempt to delay us had accidentally delayed himself. The estate froze pending review. Neither of us received anything while the process played out. He called me the week after the filing. I let it ring. He called from Melissa's phone. I let that ring too. Then he showed up at my office, which surprised me because I had not thought he still had the capacity to be surprised into doing something reckless. He was waiting in the lobby. He looked like a man who had been sleeping poorly. "Let me explain," he said when he saw me. "There's nothing to explain," I said. "Janet's information is in the filing. If you want to respond, respond through her." He followed me toward the elevator. "Ryan, come on. This has gotten out of hand." I turned around. "You filed a false child abuse report against your pregnant sister-in-law. What exactly is the version of this that is my overreaction?" He lowered his voice. I was worried. Genuinely. "Emma said something, and I misread it." "Emma said Nora caught her when she fell," I said. "That's what Emma said." You told the officer something different. He opened his mouth and closed it. I hit the elevator button. I'm not angry, I told him, which was partly true. I'm just done pretending that you're the version of yourself you've always wanted us to see. I got in the elevator. He stayed in the lobby. When the doors closed, I stood very still and breathed, and I let myself feel, for the first time since that night, how tired I was. Not of fighting. Of having believed, for 32 years, that Derek was complicated but ultimately mine. That whatever he did, he was still my brother in the way that mattered. He wasn't. He had told me so himself at our housewarming. I had just finally listened. The civil case moved. Janet was methodical in a way that I found steadying during the weeks when it felt like everything was taking too long. She deposed Derek and Melissa separately. Melissa's account of the alleged incident with Emma contradicted Derek's in 3 specific details. Small things, the kind of contradictions that emerge when 2 people have rehearsed a lie together but not carefully enough. The investigators' notes from the CPS case were subpoenaed. Emma, interviewed by a child psychologist retained by our legal team, gave a consistent account for the 3rd time. Nora caught her when she fell. Nora hugged her. They went back to the party. During all of this, my mother called me several times. The calls were uncomfortable in the specific way that calls from people who chose neutrality are uncomfortable once you're past the point of being able to pretend neutrality is a position rather than a choice. Derek is your brother, she said during one of them. He filed a false report against Nora. I said, I'm not asking you to take sides. I'm telling you what happened. He says he was scared for Emma. Emma says otherwise, I said. Under oath to a psychologist 3 separate times. A long silence. You could drop this, she said. For the family? I thought about Nora in our living room with the door closed, answering questions about whether she was safe to be around children, 7 months pregnant, at her own housewarming. I thought about how she hadn't cried until we were alone. How she had held it together in front of the officers because she understood, instinctively, that any visible emotion would be used as evidence of instability. I'm not dropping it, I said. And I want you to think about what you're actually asking me when you use the word family in this context. She didn't call again for 3 weeks. Our son was born on a Tuesday in March. Nora's labor was 11 hours and I held her hand for all of them, and when they put him in her arms, she looked at me and said, "We made something good." I thought about all the ways Derek had tried to make her feel like something dangerous, something questionable, something to be reported and reviewed and doubted. I looked at her holding our son, and I felt the specific satisfaction of a man who bet on the right person. We named him Oliver. He has Nora's eyes. The civil verdict came 4 months after Oliver was born. The court found Derek and Melissa liable for malicious filing of a false report and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The damages award was substantial, not enormous, but substantial, and the judgment was public record. It was also considered by the probate court during the final estate review, which found no basis to contest our portion of the inheritance. The estate distributed. Derek received nothing from the property clause because he had not been a property owner at the time of our grandmother's death. We received our full share. I don't know if he ever understood that the only thing standing between him and the inheritance had been his own decision to rent instead of own. He had constructed an elaborate plan to disqualify us without ever stopping to realize that changing his own circumstances would have accomplished what he wanted without any of the destruction. That is the particular stupidity of people who are smart enough to scheme but not wise enough to see clearly. The day the verdict posted, I took Oliver for a walk in the stroller around the neighborhood. Caldwell Drive in the afternoon has good light this time of year, the kind that comes through the oak trees at an angle that makes everything look older and quieter than it is. I passed the neighbors whose names I knew now, the couple 2 doors down who always waved, the older woman on the corner who had brought us a pie when we moved in, people who had chosen to be decent without drama or calculation. I thought about whether I felt anything for Derek. I ran through the word choices. Grief, no. Anger, mostly faded. Pity, maybe a little, the kind you feel for someone whose own ceiling is their character. Mostly I felt nothing that needed a name. I felt the absence of a particular weight I had not known I was carrying. When I got back to the house, Nora was on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. She had Oliver in the carrier against her chest. She handed me a cup and didn't ask how the walk was because she already knew by how I looked. "It's over," she said. "It's over," I said. We sat on the porch and drank the coffee, and Oliver slept through all of it the way babies sleep through things that would level adults, completely, with full commitment. The afternoon light was doing the thing with the oak trees. Our porch, our coffee, our son, our street. Derek never reached out after the verdict. Melissa sent one text to Nora that said, "I hope we can move past this someday," which Nora showed me and then deleted without responding, which I thought was exactly right. My mother came to visit Oliver about 2 months after the verdict. She sat on our couch and held him and didn't bring up Derek or the case or the housewarming. Toward the end of the visit, as she was putting on her coat at the door, she said, quietly and without looking at me directly, "I should have said something that night. I watched too long. I want you in Oliver's life," I told her. "I mean that. But I need you to understand that what you're saying right now is true. You watched too long. That has to mean something to you, not just something you say." She nodded. I think she understood that I wasn't slamming a door. I was telling her what kind of door it was. 4 months after that, my firm asked me to lead a new division. Nora went back to her classroom in September. Oliver's daycare is 3 blocks from her school, which was the deciding factor when we chose it, so she can walk by at lunch sometimes and wave through the window at the woman who runs the toddler room, who always picks him up and brings him to the glass. I have been told he waves back with full-body commitment. We did not take a honeymoon when we got married because money was tight. After the estate distribution came through, we booked a week in Portugal. Nora researched the restaurants for 2 months beforehand and made a spreadsheet with color coding. I teased her about the spreadsheet. She told me I was welcome to eat gas station food if I had a better system. On the second night in Lisbon, we had dinner at a place on a hill with the city below us, and Nora ordered something she couldn't pronounce. And the waiter was kind about it. And she laughed the way she laughs when she's genuinely happy, which is different from her polite laugh, more air in it, less controlled. I sat across from her and thought about my brother calculating her value, and I thought about the moment she walked out of that CPS interview with her chin level and her hands steady. She had never been what he thought she was. She had never been anything except exactly herself. His mistake, the central and I think irreversible mistake of his character, was believing that her goodness was a softness. That it was something that bent. He was wrong about that the way you can only be wrong when you have never actually looked at the person in front of you. There was a night. About a month after the housewarming, when everything was still very much in motion and I had gotten home late from a meeting with Janet and Nora was already asleep, and I sat in the kitchen in the dark for a while and let myself feel it. The real version, not the tactical version I had been running on. I felt the specific grief of someone who has lost a relationship he thought was permanent. Derek and I had grown up in the same house. I had been his best man. There are photographs of us as children that I still have in a box in the closet. I sat in my kitchen and I missed my brother, the version I had wanted him to be, the version I had insisted on seeing long past the evidence. That feeling didn't make what I did wrong. I want to be clear about that. I sat with the grief and I let it be grief, and then I kept going. Because Nora was asleep in our bedroom and Oliver was a few weeks from arriving, and the house on Caldwell Drive still had bookshelves we needed to finish painting. There was too much real in front of me to be stopped by the loss of something that had only ever been partly true. A professor, I know, after reading some of the public case documents, asked if I would come speak to a graduate seminar on family law and estate litigation. She wanted me to talk about how the personal and legal dynamics had intersected. I almost said no. Then I thought about how many people must be out there who have a version of Derek in their life, someone who has calculated that their love for a person is a resource to be extracted and redirected. Someone who has used the language of family to mean something closer to leverage. I went. I stood at the front of that room and I told it plainly. Not the revenge of it. The deciding of it. The part where you choose what you're going to do with what someone has shown you about themselves. Afterward, a student stayed back and said, "I have a brother kind of like that." I looked at her. "I know," I said. "Most people do. The question is when you stop explaining away the evidence." She nodded in the particular way of someone who already knows the answer and is still working up to it. I understood that. I had been in that place too. Longer than I would like to admit. On the drive home, I called Nora to tell her it went well. She said she already knew because I sound different when things go badly and she'd been listening for it. I asked her what I sound like when things go badly. She said, like someone trying to sound like things went fine. I told her she was very annoying. She said, "You love it." I told her she was right. Oliver was already asleep when I got home. I stood in the doorway of his room for a minute the way you do, just watching him breathe in the dark. He was starting to look less like a baby and more like a person you could imagine growing up. The bookshelves were straight now. The tile Nora picked was right. The porch had that good afternoon light. Everything in that house had been chosen and built and argued over and assembled by the two of us. There was not a single corner of it that owed anything to my brother's version of how our lives were supposed to go. I closed Oliver's door softly and went to find Nora. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.